Yeah, this is an example of blending data, right? You have your traditional ERP, it could be a sales data and so on, or from your CRM. Then you have your mapping data, maps and so on, your geospatial. You blend all of them together in one dashboard and explaining things. Now, this kind in 2010, for one of the high-tech companies here, we did a proof of concept doing something like this. We spent in 6 figures and just a basic proof of concept using Google Maps and so on. Now the same thing is done in 1/10 the time. So now once you go beyond blending the data and so on, then comes the dashboards, right? So if any of you are interested, we have a big slide deck of dashboard after dashboard for around 150 slides. Now, some of them look really beautiful, some of them look very basic, but it's almost like everybody has a different view on what's a good dashboard or what's the right dashboard. One of the most interesting dashboard I think I was showing to Robert the other day was looking at how sports teams move across different parts of the country and so on, right? So they did a pretty good job of putting all the logos, the sports team, but it took us 15 minutes to figure out what are they trying to say. So while the dashboard itself, they've used some really good features and they've done a phenomenal job of explaining how much San Francisco 49ers have traveled in the last 1 year and so on. But if somebody didn't explain, it took us 15 minutes to figure that out, and that kind of defeats the purpose behind defining good dashboards. So, but again, there is no right or wrong answer, and it's almost like you can go with one set of dashboard and be ready to get shot down, or somebody has a totally different view of things. And many times, especially from a user community standpoint, what we have seen is users, and it's not to undermine their abilities or none of those things. It's more like they have a job to do and they conclude based on what they see, what's underneath it and what business logic is involved, how difficult is it to change a business process. That's not in their immediate attention when they're trying to get a dashboard out. So but they have a lot of weightage in getting the right dashboard out. You can get, there's a good portion of the people who might agree with that it's easy to get a dashboard up and get your data and all those things. But when people start asking, can you show this, can you show this, the complexity of pulling some of the data actually drives what's the end result you get out of the dashboard. So when we get into a project, we start with a set of worries that we make sure, do you have data access infrastructure? If you find issues with the data, will you be able to change the process? And is there enough executive support and so on? Because BI projects have a failure rate of almost 50%. Paul, I don't know if you have a better statistics than that. Traditionally, they have 50% is a very good success rate.
Along with just outright failure, they quite often just fail to deliver. They don't deliver the results we're expecting.
Right.
And so they're disappointed. People are disappointed, and they don't know who to blame.
Yeah. Now, the key word there is they don't deliver what they expect. Now, the expectation is in somebody's mind, right? And it's not always documented well. But they approve the budget, they fund the project, and they say, I want this dashboard showing my sales projections and so on. But what do they have in mind is something to quantify that and to get into all the other aspects, because they are thinking of the dashboard. If Salesforce process flow is set up incorrectly, they're not worrying about that when they're describing the problem. So these are the things that cost a lot of money if you don't do this right. And having been through these experiences, we are more and more cautious every time we get into the next project. And at the same time, we have to catch up with the technology to make sure that if there is a problem that can be solved much easier, we know that before the customer. So, to the point I was making earlier, and some of you might have seen this through Tableau. If you can't figure out in 5 seconds on what the dashboard is saying, then the dashboard is not good enough, right? And unless you're the only person using the dashboard and it's designed for you, but generally speaking, it should be quick. I'm going through this quickly because it's more about us having a discussion than me presenting slides. Some of the things that we have noticed is Tableau is easy for people to pick it up. For basic dashboarding, you don't need training like OBIE and Hyperion. You need to go through sometimes a couple of days of training to get it right. The intuitiveness is what kind of gets most of the users. That's why you see mass adoptions. Now, where they run into challenges from intermediate to advanced usage. What kind of statistical analysis can Tableau do? When should I go to R? What can R do? Or when should I go to Alteryx or something else, right? So there are questions that remain, and that's where you need more help. Or sometimes you just want like 50 people in the organization to be aware of get-go, right? Because not everybody is motivated to get started with Tableau at the same time. So that's kind of where there may be a need for training. So we have done training sometimes where 100 people have shown up, right, and oversubscribed. So there's a lot of interest that it creates. And sometimes we worry about other logistical problems, right? Classroom size and all those. And then Paul was there with some of the training sessions as well. Right? The subscriptions, the amount of interest that has shown up in the last 1 year is not what we saw for the last decade. So now, when we think of these visual tools training, it's more around the creativity and the features and more about how to explore is what we suggest when you conduct trainings, right? Than to guide them towards a typical SDLC process, like do this kind of thing. So, because through the creativity, there is some really good dashboards that people create, sometimes out of design, sometimes by trial and error, right? And the insights, I'll quote an example. There is a VP who handles about $400 million worth of budget. Her number one problem was, I have all these people all over the world. Every year I spend $400 million paying them, but I really can't figure out who is doing what, where are they located at what time, and so on. And we have this 4 or 5 sets of data, but I'm not able to get this answer for last how many years I've been in the organization. We took the data, we used some basic technology, open source technology and so on, and Tableau, quick download, free download, what their organization will do. Within a matter of 2 days, we were able to map all the data and showcase it to them. The idea is what she always believed that they cannot see, or they could not. She pretty much said, you can map this data because the data doesn't all join with each other and so on. But the tools have got so sophisticated. In fact, in the next version of Tableau, when you see, I think you were there in the Tableau conference, the way you do the join and even preparing the data, it's got more sophisticated. And which means you do less work trying to prepare the data for dashboards. So this means your possibility of joining and mapping data is much more simpler. And it is quite intriguing how they've been able to create those intelligence around columns. It kind of figures out these columns could potentially join with this and the joins will happen. But if you disagree with the joins, you can of course remove the joins and so on, right? So those features are going to make the users who are even less familiar with tables and joins and so on use these tools. So I picked 2 case studies just to showcase what we learned and what we dealt with and so on. The first one is where we had to create Tableau dashboards. The project was pretty much around create Tableau dashboards, and this is our sales history and bookings and revenue and predict how much we are going to grow or decline in the market. And the client pretty much assured the data is all there, everything is in place, and at the most requires very minimal, because this is how we have been reporting for the last 5 years, and all you have to do is come and enable Tableau. And many times when you get into a project, if the customer is saying so confidently, you can't really challenge without looking at the data that your data may not be right. So anyway, we got into it, and as we started going through the exercise, we discovered that the hierarchies have flaws. The revenues are getting, or the sales have been bucketed under different areas. They would sometimes, if they want to drill down and see why is government, Texas government buying less of our hardware, right? And people could not answer that.